Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, March 13th, 2026. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, Commentary's contributing editor and host of the Breaking History podcast, Eli Lake. Hi, Eli.
Hi, John. I always complain I never say hi, John.
Yes,
so there.
You say hey, John, or ho, John,
yeah.
or, hey, nani, John, whatever. Eli has an article in the cover package of our April issue, which should be out today at commentary.org as we close the issue and send it to the printer to ship it to our subscribers in physical form, but it will be also available online to our subscribers. The package is called Iran Amok. It has an article that we discussed a little yesterday by Jonathan Schanzer called Regime Change Without Nation Building. It has an article by Todd Lindbergh about how the similarities between the logic that began this war and the logic that began the Iraq war, which we're not supposedly allowed to say, but we flesh out. A piece by me that has the plangent title, They Should Have Listened to My Dad. And then we have Eli Lake's article, which is about Israel's 20-year effort to build the capacity to get to the point where it could fight this war as majestically as it seems to be fighting it. But we can't start there because we have to talk about what happened yesterday, both at Old Dominion University and in West Bloomfield, Michigan. 2 terrorist attacks, one foiled, one partially successful until the attacker was taken down by students in a remarkable display of fortitude and courage. And we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. Number one, is some kind of a Iranian sleeper agent series or some kind of events relating to Iran's effort to fight back in this war with asymmetrical means underway? Number one. And number two, what about Islamophobia? Because I don't know if you know this, but the real issue here is Islamophobia. Even though there were 140 children in the building that the terrorist smashed his car into, with bomb equipment in the car that eventually somehow was ignited and burned him to a crisp. But very easily could have gone the other way. We could have had a mass casualty event involving scores and scores and scores of children, as well as the adults who were taking care of them in the nursery school and daycare center. So, Eli, you are not only an expert on war, but you are an expert on terrorism. What do you make of what's going on?
Okay, so I want to address the sleeper cell question first. I don't think these are sleeper cells because they look like inspired lone wolf attacks. And, you would, I think the Iranians we know that they have certainly infiltrated the United States and other countries with people who would be kind of organizers of sorts. But these look like the kind of things that we associated with ISIS in the 2010s. These are individuals.
Well, literally, the
Gracie Mansion were ISIS inspired.
No, attacks. And the guy who killed 2 people at Old Dominion, served 6 years in jail as an agent of ISIS in the United States. The question we are going to have answered in the next week is, why did he get out of jail, and why was no one watching him?
Right. The argument at the time from the civil liberties crowd was he was entrapped because the FBI is so good at kind of infiltrating these networks, which gets to another part of this, which is that when we heard about Iranian sleeper cells and the threat of terrorism in response to conventional warfare against Iran, when when this issue was brought up, between Obama and Netanyahu 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago, it was an era when I don't think we had as much confidence in our ability to take out networks inside of our country. The problem, as it was that as we've now known for some time, is that it's possible to have these kinds of inspired attacks without networks. And until I see evidence that there was some kind of coordination, I'm just assuming that sadly there are people in this country, and we know this from the Gaza war. I mean, that that absolute monster filth guy, Elias, what is his name? I'm forgetting his Rodriguez, right? Who went to the Capitol Jewish Museum and shot two Israeli diplomats. So that person was inspired by, and that is the world we live in. And I think that that's the real terrorism threat. It's not, the kind of terrorism that we associate with either the first real wave in the 1970s, where you had all kinds of financiers and other spotters and people who did, forged identities and things like that. And that there was a whole you had to have a whole network in order to create, to get to one attack. Now with the internet, and kind of this constant, steady drumbeat of propaganda, you can get people. You just, you don't need all of that. So that's my first impression, unless we see other evidence.
That feels right to me too, and I think that seems to be the case with the shooter from who shot up the bar in Austin, Texas, a few weeks back as well. Do we still know anything? What's the follow-up on the New Year's Day New Orleans attack? Not this year, but of January 1st last year.
The car that drove through the crowd in New Orleans. Yeah,
that was another ISIS-inspired guy. As Eli was talking, it occurred to me that we always talk about, in a completely different context, people doing things alone via their screens, in a twisted way, as opposed to being connected in a twisted way. This is another version of that. You can now just sort of, as a cell of one, you can radicalize, get the material you need, go out into the world and do your attack without leaving much of a trace around you, because there are no connections.
Well, we have these mystery killings, right? I mean, the thing is that assassins, as we know, we're constantly assuming that successful American assassins were part of a network, and that's obviously the Lee Harvey. We had 60 plus years of presumptions about Lee Harvey Oswald, and more. We have never conclusively uncovered a plot that involved a network seeking to assassinate an American president or American political figure. And we're talking about, going back to, although, I mean, I guess
John Wilkes Booth was,
yes, right,
was absolutely sent.
That's right.
By the Confederate spies.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct. I mean, dating from Garfield onward, these were often acts of psychopathy. I mean, there were attempts. There was the attempt on Harry Truman by Puerto Rican nationalists in 1951. There have been other attempts, but I'm saying that we have much more of a history of the lone wolf succeeding, because, of course, once you involve people in a network, the likelier it is, particularly now, that somebody from that network will say something to somebody else in a bar, who will then go to the cops, who will then arrest him, who will then help roll up the network. It's not a safe bet to involve a lot of people in a conspiracy plot in the United States. People are actually pretty good at breaking them up. So
there's two other things. One is the MO for the Iranians historically has been that when they do networked attacks, it has been against their domestic political opposition. That was what happened with the interim Iranian prime minister who was murdered in Paris. That was what happened with various Kurdish leaders. There was an attack, by the way, that on the captain of the USS Vincennes, who shot down an Iranian commercial airliner. And so the Iranians will send out teams of assassins into the United States for very targeted kind of killings, but not, Al Qaeda style terrorism or the kind of terrorism that they support, in Lebanon or against Israel and so forth. The other thing is that, and this is just by way of inference, because it's possible that they could have dual tracks, of course, but the Iranians invested a tremendous amount of kind of resources in a charm offensive and cultivating useful idiots in the United States. We all have covered Trita Parsi and the organization he founded called the NIAC. But it was deeper than that. I mean, people like former foreign minister.
You wrote the definitive piece on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I did many years ago for the Washington Times. And the people like Javad Zarif, who was the Iranian foreign minister, but, he cultivated American largely on the left, but also he cultivated, I think, you could say the kind of isolationist right. And so if that was your strategy, and I think it was Iran's strategy, was to try to change American foreign policy through these kind of charm offensives and saying, oh, we have Hassan Rouhani now, and we really want to get a deal and all these other things, and using their access to our mainstream media. If you also were playing a game where you were going to potentially, even if you didn't pull the trigger, if you had networks that were basically terror networks inside the United States, that would immediately discredit your fairly successful charm offensive. So I'm just throwing that out there as well.
Okay, so let's take that to one side. So what we have here is there is a story of a success and a failure yesterday. The success is that the mass casualty event at the shul was prevented, and it was prevented after injuring one security guard. Another security guard shot the would-be bomber. Somehow something went off in his car and fried him after he was shot, and so that this is a successful interdiction of a terrorist plot. The other, not successful in the sense that the assassin killed two people, and before he was himself subdued. I want to talk about what it means that attack, that the foiling of the attack in Michigan was a success. It appears that in the weeks before the attack, that the security team at the synagogue did a joint exercise with FBI agents on how to act in case there was a violent event. And it appears, based on what little we've heard so far, that training was critical in helping those security people working for, a wage at the synagogue were able to prevent this horrifying calamity from happening. Jewish sites all across the country have hardened themselves pretty much since 2018. Before, a lot of places were very careful about security before 2018, but after the Tree of Life and Poway incidents in 2018, 2019, the Jewish community nationwide committed itself to the idea that it was going to have to batten down the hatches and protect itself. And according to Eric Fingerhut, who is the chairman of the Jewish Federations of America, Jewish organizations spend, I just want you to think about this for a second, $750 million a year on self-defense. It's an important number because there is a certain cohort of very activist Jews in America who complain that Jews we're not doing enough to protect ourselves. We need to go out and get gun training. We need to arm ourselves and do all this. And the simple fact of the matter is that may or may not be true in individual cases, but the Jewish community in America has stepped up to an unprecedented degree I mean, this is nearly $1 billion a year being spent on security for, for 5.2 million people, or for institutions that serve 5.2 million people. It's an extraordinary outpouring of very deliberate and very responsible behavior. We're always complaining here on the podcast in a commentary about the failure of American Jewish institutions, and I believe that most of them have very, very deep and significant flaws. But this is something that, as a kind of community, we have done right, and God only knows if this hadn't happened, and if this we're going to do it ourselves thing hadn't taken place, whether untold numbers of deaths and injuries should take place. Right now, we see there was two incidents yesterday, one in I think the Netherlands and one in Norway, where synagogues were attacked. One of them was firebombed, but no one was in it. These are places that don't have the same kind of protection. So I just think that's an important point to make. And
yeah, can I read something from the Times of
Please.
from the time I don't know if it's Times of Israel or JTL, Times of Israel,
Yeah.
that caught my attention yesterday, that I highlighted in my brain, because I thought that it made this point really well. This is a story about the Michigan synagogue. Beyond the synagogue's full-time director of security later said Temple Israel also has a full team of armed security guards on the premises at all times, as well as a remote security system that can secure different areas of the buildings during threats. So that's a description, so people know what we're dealing with here. That's a kind of, Fort Knoxian setup that a large reform shul in Michigan.
We should say, and this is where it's interesting about the question of targeting, because this guy was likely a lone wolf, but maybe not, because he chose one of the 2 or 3 largest synagogues in the United States of America. This is a shul with 3,300 families. That is an astonishing number of members for an American, for a synagogue, not only in the United States but anywhere. And so it cannot be that choice, since he had to drive from Dearborn to pick someplace to go, it cannot be that choice was made completely by happenstance. He must have scoped it out. He must have targeted. He drove into a specific door near the nursery school. So it's not like this wasn't a planned attack on a very large institution. That may have been his mistake in an odd way. Obviously, the Texas incident that I guess Abe referred to, there was an attack on a Texas shul where famously the rabbi called Angelo Buchdahl of Central Synagogue for the for the person who would invade it to talk to the head Jew and try to talk him down. One of the reasons that invasion was successful is that it's a little synagogue in the middle of nowhere, and so access points were easy. It wasn't hard to get in. This is a big place, has a lot of money, and spent a lot of money on security. And anyone who lives in, I go to a synagogue that just rebuilt itself to make itself more secure. The school that my kids go to, or my kids have gone to, has security features I don't even know about. Some of them I recognize, like famously man traps, which are sort of a series of doors you have to go through where the doors can be locked down ahead, and the glass is bulletproof, and so it's not so easy to get through. But there's way more there that I don't know and that nobody knows to, in fact, be able to lock the building down. This is all very, very, very expensive, and so
right. And it's also rare. What they have at Temple Israel in Michigan is rare because of that. That is the description of what they have. How many synagogues do people think have a team of armed guards at all times on the premises? That's extremely rare.
Right.
How many synagogues have a remote lockdown that you can lock down different portions of the building, but leave certain exits open, right? These are strategic things.
Right.
We've all been in buildings where sometimes you have to be, rushed out of a different door, a door you didn't know that was there or whatever. Like, this is a synagogue that
I
has
got to
that.
ask another question. And Eli, I got to ask this of you because you're not only an expert on terrorism and you're an expert on warfighting, but you're also an expert on the FBI. And I mentioned that the FBI had done this training session with the Temple Israel, with the shul. It's 2024. The FBI is in the Biden administration, which is very concerned about the Arab vote in Michigan. The FBI doing trainings with Temple Israel, or has the Trump administration, which has committed itself to fighting anti-Semitism on campuses and in dealing with hate crime, enforcing various federal efforts to make sure that anti-Semitism is there a renewed focus inside the FBI on this? That certainly there will be now, having had this success. But I wonder. I genuinely. I don't think that the Biden administration was anti-Semitic. I don't think that its FBI team and Christopher Wray were bad. I don't believe any of that. But maybe the FBI has taken this more seriously, and what happened here might the success in interposing, in creating the conditions in which this did not turn into the slaughter that it could have been. Those training exercises may not have taken place at a different.
I don't think that's the case because, first of all, there was no political cost to the Biden administration providing security for synagogues, Jewish community centers, etc. The issue was, the political issue was the arms transfers and sales to Israel and the overall position of our foreign policy with regard to Israel. That was the ask, that was the demand of the radical fringe of the Democratic Party in an election year. It was not don't help synagogues protect themselves. I think a better question to ask is, Dearborn is a cesspool, and we have video from Dearborn City Council, for example, where the mayor is like berating somebody who wants to condemn Hezbollah. Dearborn reminds me in some ways of some of the communities that were like, the police couldn't go in Belgium because they were a bunch of unassimilated, communities that have taken clearly anti-American, viciously anti-Israel, anti-Semitic views, and that the kind of politics of extremism in the Middle East has become a kind of normal thing for the politics of Dearborn. That's undeniable. A lot of that, of course, that expressing loathsome opinions is covered by the First Amendment, and so that's a challenge, in my view, as somebody who cares a lot about that, for any administration. But I would like to know if there is, a renewed focus on a place like Dearborn and other communities in the United States.
Do you want to know, or do you not want to know because you don't want to know because you want to know that it's happening successfully and secretly, so that that's what I mean. Like, you don't actually want them to come out and say we're really spying on Dearborn, like there's no tomorrow.
No, but what I'm saying is that if you wanted to know where the political pressure would be historically, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is a direct outgrowth of the Muslim Brotherhood, there's plenty of court documentation and evidence that one can look at if they're interested to sort of show the evolution of that organization. But one of the things that they did is they kind of placed themselves in the position with the FBI of being the liaison with the American Muslim community, which is itself a somewhat dangerous thing given the ideological predilections of CARE. So I would like to know kind of how that's going. And are there, because I would think, let's leave Iran out of it. I would think that if you're just sort of somebody who believed in a kind of radical vision of political Islam or the Muslim Brotherhood, Dearborn would be a place where you would kind of see, you would almost be like kind of a safe haven of sorts in the United States. So that's the question. And you raise a good point, John, is that I actually don't want to know about active investigations because I'd like them to be successful. But I would say it's on that side of the ledger where I would have more questions than the providing protection for Jewish institutions.
The problem with a place like Dearborn is that it's not just a matter of, okay, we need all sorts of intelligence and law enforcement agencies spying and stopping plots before they come to fruition and keeping an eye on who's doing what. That's obviously an important part of it, but there's the deeper problem that there is this community there, and there are politicians there that support this community, that resist the kinds of things we're talking about. And so, is it okay to have a little little outlet of Middle East radicalism, this little pocket in the United States, as long as we just spy on it indefinitely, and sort of do our best to make sure that the worst doesn't happen, and otherwise just sort of let this thing thrive. I mean,
well, I always thought that the way to address this is that, and this is going to seem quaint and completely out of touch with the current mood of our country and the mood of the American right, is that the best allies in America against radical Islam would be like Americans who are fleeing the Taliban in Afghanistan or Iraq or other places who served with our U.S. forces, in the sense that the first victims of radical Islam are almost always fellow Muslims, and that the problem is when we assume that regime apologists like Trita Parsi speak for Iranian Americans, or for that matter, Muslim Brotherhood organizations like CARE speak for American Muslims.
Important point I got to bring up, which is Juliet Kayyem, who is a terrorism expert, worked, I believe, in the Clinton administration. I think either teaches at Harvard or has taught at Harvard, was on CNN yesterday in the wake of the Shul event, saying this is really dangerous because, of course, anti-Semitism is terrible, and also we need to worry about the safety of Iranian Americans. This was a very interesting game because it dovetails with earlier events on CNN this week, where on three different occasions, people on CNN attempted to claim that the IED throwing of the two kids from Pennsylvania at Gracie Mansion was an attempt to attack Zohran Mamdani rather than to attack the anti-Muslim protest that was going on against Mamdani, so as to turn Mamdani into a target of terrorism. CNN basically had to apologize 3 times or pull things off or do whatever. But Juliet Kayyem's moment, this is very interesting, because if you had to pick a community in the United States that was probably close to 100% supportive of the mission of the war in Iran right now, it would be the Iranian American community. The overwhelming majority of which exists here in the United States because they fled the Islamic Republic takeover in 1979 and came to New York and went to Los Angeles and other places and have been remarkable. It's a remarkable success story. They are, they are a remarkable immigrant community, wildly pro-American. And this is their dream come true, that the United States should be interposing itself and attempting some version of either regime change or the punishment of this regime that destroyed their lives and stole their country from them. And this effort to turn the Iran war into something where Americans who don't know what I'm talking about here would think, oh, this is really dangerous. for poor Iranian
And
Americans.
we should note also that they have the Iranians in the States. Many of them still have family there who are in danger or are in perpetual danger, right? I mean,
Right.
people who leave an authoritarian country
From the regime, you mean, not
from the
from
regime. That's
not
what I
from
mean, right?
not
To
from the
right to
right.
be clear, from people who leave an authoritarian regime, Russia.
I'm sure that Iranians with family in Iran are fearful and worried that the war may have consequences on their families. I don't want to belittle the idea that people are having sleepless nights over the fact that American and Israeli bombings are taking place in Iran. That is normal. But yes, the thing.
But I
that
just
they
mean that
fear,
when they
danger,
leave when they leave a country, they're not free of its grasp. They're not free of the stress in many cases of living with it. The regime still, fuels fear in their lives. It still keeps them sort of paralyzed in certain ways. They're afraid for family back home and all this other stuff. And so, yeah, it's not just they did bad stuff to us and we got out and I'd love to see them fall. It's as long as that regime remains in place, a lot of people who have made it out, they still can't sleep through the night necessarily all that comfortably because their parents, their cousins, whatever, are there and they worry for them. And the fall of the regime is the one thing that would truly free them.
This effort, though, there seems to be a weird effort to characterize the American and Israeli attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran as a moment that will incite anti-Muslim or anti-Iranian or anti-Shiite activity in the United States, whereas, in fact, almost the opposite, as these 3 attacks this week would seem to suggest, what it's triggering is Shiite violence inside the United States, and obviously
no, we don't even know if it's Shiite. The guy in Bloomfield was Lebanese,
right?
I mean, he may have been from a Shiite family, but
his brother was Hezbollah. His brothers apparently were Shiite. Hezbollah, so he was probably Shiite. But in any case, I'm saying that the violence that we've seen so far is Muslim violence against Americans, not American violence against Muslims. And this constant effort to invert the threat, we're a free society, a free people who don't go around taking pot shots at, the only people who get, punched in the back of the head in the United States for religious reasons are frum Jews walking in Brooklyn. I haven't seen a story in 25 years about how some guy was walking down the street in Brooklyn and there are many Muslims wearing, Muslim garb in Brooklyn getting punched in the back of the head by a Jew or by anybody for that matter. And there's this constant effort to refocus and to blame the United States for the violence done to the United States. And that's now happening in the discussions of the Strait of Hormuz, which we could move to if that's okay with you guys.
Just really quick on Julia Kayam to show us. I mean, this is not scientific, but social media, Iranian social media, was flooded with videos of Iranians doing the Trump dance when Khamenei was killed.
Right.
And what does that tell you, Juliet? Come on. Little seckle.
Okay. And let's talk
can I add
Dearborn. One point about Dearborn, though. I got to just say, I'm sorry, Seth, but Dearborn, Michigan, a prominent Shiite organization in Dearborn, Michigan, this is from the Christian Post, held a memorial for the late Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei over the weekend, honoring him for his martyrdom. Hassan Salameh, one of the speakers at the memorial held at the Hadi Institute, we're gathered here today to commemorate the martyrdom of the great leader of our time, Sayyid Ali Hussein Khamenei. So that's what's happening.
But that's what I mean about Dearborn being this larger problem. Like it's not we can't have that.
I mean, we can't not have it. That's the problem. The question is, how do we not have it? This is America 2026.
That's a challenge.
We have a First Amendment. We have freedom of religion. We have freedom of expression. All we can do is determine whether or not such people are, like paid agents or actually working for a foreign government that we're, we're at war
Well,
with
I
or
think,
something like that. But
John,
without that, you can't stop it.
there's a retort.
You need to shine a spotlight on it,
Yes,
so that this Julia
yes.
Kayamism is
Right.
is strangled in its crib.
But on what you said, I bet if you went to Dearborn, you would find very similar talking points that have now been adopted by, I don't know, the based right, the Tucker Carlson right, and certainly a lot of more and more mainstream elements of the Democrats, which is that this is a war for Israel. It's not in America's interest. And then when you see a celebration of the martyrdom of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, someone who has gallons of blood on his American blood on his hands,
And who last month, or 6 weeks
yeah,
ago, ordered the killing of 30 to 40,000 Iranians in the streets of Iran, his own people.
yes. But I want to get to something very important here, because there is a really disgusting kind of calm strategy right now to try to say that this is a war foisted on America, foisted by Bibi Netanyahu, which kind of gets into our next conversation, that is not in America's interest, and that people who support the war are placing the interest of Israel above America. That is clearly a rhetorical strategy beyond Dearborn. But then I look at Dearborn and I look at a kind of an element of this stuff which focuses on uncritically saying whatever the Iranian regime says about things that are happening in the war. And some of that, by the way, is true. The girls' school is a horrible tragedy, and that was on America. It was a misfire, as an accident, but a horribly tragic one. But the point is that, like, who are you calling un-American? Whose loyalty are you questioning when you've got Dearborn, Michigan, celebrating the martyrdom of a vicious, disgusting thug of a leader who's responsible for the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans, and you've got top podcasters who are uncritically parroting the line of this regime, which has been at war with us for 47 years, and you're the one telling me that I'm a disloyal American, that I'm subverting the American national interest. Get out of here. And I think in a weird way, because I think our side sometimes is uncomfortable simply pointing out that I think that there are a lot of disloyal Americans right now, a lot of people who in a time of war are taking the enemy's side, either indirectly or, in the case of Dearborn and this, martyrdom ceremony, directly. So it's an important point to sort of make out, because
that's why I want to move on. I want to move on to the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, because the Strait of Hormuz is the narrow passageway, in the shipping passed from the east to the west, mostly some from the west to the east. And the Strait of Hormuz has been an issue in international politics going on 6 decades. The shutting of the Strait of Hormuz was one moment in the Six-Day War in 1967. And so this is a thing where they 73, the Saudis kind of shut the Strait of Hormuz in order to succeed with its oil embargo. We go on. There have been attacks in the Strait of Hormuz. Noah Rothman has a really great piece about this in National Review right now. America has been dealing with the question of the Strait of Hormuz and how to keep it open. There was an effort to close it during the Iran-Iraq War in 1987. We actually had an air campaign to keep it open. The United States flew and had a mission that had a specific name to ensure that it was kept open, and so on. So now we have this accusation. The accusation, which has now come in the pages of the New York Times, on CNN and elsewhere, is that the administration was shocked and surprised to see the Iranians think that their asymmetric strategy, since they could not attack us directly because their air defenses are down and they don't have any real weapons at hand, would be to mine the Strait of Hormuz or close the Strait of Hormuz or something like that. And this came as a terrible shock to this administration. And that cannot be true, because American military planning in the Middle East at CENTCOM, question 2 is how to keep the Strait of Hormuz open if there is going to be military action. Question one is, what should the military action be? And question two is, in order to make sure that the world economy doesn't collapse and that, the lifeblood of the West isn't choked off, or that the cost of oil goes up to $250 a barrel, what do you do about the Strait of Hormuz? We have 60 years of obsessive focus on the Strait of Hormuz. Where are these stories coming from about how they didn't take the Strait of Hormuz seriously? From former officials, lawmakers briefed on the situation, and experts. So, former officials work for the Obama and Biden administrations and want Trump to fail in this war. Lawmakers are Chris Murphy and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, are my key targets, because they're the ones who are coming out and saying what I heard in the briefing yesterday shocked my soul, and da-da-da-da-da. But it may not be them, maybe other Democrats. It is extremely unlikely, unless it is Rand Paul, it is extremely unlikely that a Republican lawmaker came out and said they have no plan for the Strait. They were shocked. They said they didn't know that the Iranians would do it. I am telling you right now, this is a lie. The press is being lied to. They're being told an untruth. Then when you feed the untruth to experts and others who have no way of knowing, since they're former officials, so they don't have any intelligence, and they're experts, so they're just sitting around, they're as expert as I am, and bullshitting as they talk. There's no way this is true.
John, can I add to this point?
Yeah, can I just point out, final point? Iranians, we know, set 16 mines a couple of days ago. And within an hour, those mines were retrieved by American minesweepers. So are they not watching the Strait of Hormuz? They are watching the Strait of Hormuz. Are they acting in the Strait of Hormuz? They are acting in the Strait of Hormuz. Is this a problem? Because it's actually very low cost to make trouble in the Strait of Hormuz. And it's you could take a little boat and drop a mine. It doesn't have to be a big boat to drop a mine. Is that a problem? Without question. However, you are being lied to, and the purpose of the lie, and then I'm going to finish my rant here, is demoralization. The strategy seems to be not to say this war is terrible, not to say we shouldn't be doing this, but to say they don't have a plan. I don't know what they're doing. What the hell is going on? Now oil prices are going up. What on earth is going on? And it is having an effect on people who would ordinarily be perfectly supportive of this, because when you get hammered over the head with they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're doing, they don't seem to know what to do in the Strait of Hormuz, they don't know. And then like Eli and I have a text exchange yesterday afternoon going, what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz? Do they even know what the hell they're doing in the Strait of Hormuz? And then if you then take a pause and you step back for 2 seconds, as Noah Rothman does in this excellent piece in National Review, you're like, of course, they're not, you may hate Pete Hegseth and think he's an idiot, or that Trump is an idiot, but CENTCOM is not an idiot. And CENTCOM has been fighting wars in the Middle East without let up for 25 years, and it knows it has to keep the Strait of Hormuz open.
But excuse me, Trump as well. I mean, it has to be said here, Donald Trump has been much more cognizant of the Iranian threat for far longer than anyone realizes, than people give him credit for. People think he's dumb about this, he's dumb about it, he doesn't know anything about this. He's been talking, and so someone today on X pulled up about 10 old Trump tweets of him specifically saying during one conflict or another, what are they doing about securing the Strait of Hormuz? That we need the shipping to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Complaining about other administrations in the past. This is not something. As you say, John, it's impossible that this would not be on. Forget CENTCOM, his mind.
Can I add a counterpoint here?
Of course.
The one sliver. I don't want to give the senators Blumenthal and Murphy any credit here.
Again, I really don't know it's them. I don't know. It's them.
I know, but I don't want to give. I don't want to.
Okay.
I agree with you that it's strange credulity to think that the administration doesn't have a plan for the Strait of Hormuz and isn't aware of it, and that it's just a failure of planning and so forth. But the one point that I think is fair to make is that this administration has been all over the map about what the objectives of the war are and why we did it. And there was no, it was no process. And we can argue about the War Powers Act, and I grant that that there's precedent for major military actions like Obama with Libya without going to Congress. I totally understand all of that. What I'm saying is that this administration, if depending on who's talking on what day, we have a completely different mission for the war. When J.D. Vance is asked about it on Fox News, he says it's all about making sure Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. And then, Trump is like, the Iranian people will have their chance once the bombs stop dropping. Netanyahu sort of says that too. And then you hear Rubio saying, well, it's about projecting power in the region, but also we're going to be, it's all over the place. And that's really the fault of the improvisational maximum flexibility position of Trump, which some people can say is an advantage. I think in some ways you could, I'm even open to saying it's an advantage. The advantage is that he doesn't box himself into a ground war in Iran where we have a bunch of, 22-year-old infantry, soldiers running checkpoints. That's good. That's a good thing. However, on the other hand, one of the downsides of it is that we haven't gotten this kind of very clear process where the American people were brought along saying, this is why we're doing the war. It's been 47 years. They are not going to negotiate. They are going to try to build a conventional weapons missile shield so they can finally get their bomb. And when they do, let me tell you, these maniacs will use it. That's the argument that needs to be made in a sober way, not with memes and action movie clips. All of that, I just want to say, is why you get these stories, and they maybe have some resonance because the case for the war has been all over the place.
Can I add one thing on the where this information is coming from? It's also worth noting that these former administration, when we talk about former administration officials, we have to remember that there was a pretty wide influence operation, the Iran Experts Initiative, that I don't want to say infiltrated. I don't want to, I would choose my words carefully. I'm not, but that had people who were considered experts and who had the ear of the Biden administration, figures from the Biden and Obama administration, that group of people, and who were happy to spread, who were in contact with Iranian government officials and would coordinate talking points and strategies with Iranian government officials and then speak them into the administration. Some of these people ended up becoming advisors in some way or another to the administration, because that's what happens. You start as a think tanker, and this guy's an Iran expert or she's an Iran expert. You bring her on, and slowly but surely this Iran Experts Initiative got closer and closer to the centers of power. Then the other thing is that Robert Malley, who was Biden's main guy on the Iran negotiations and the nuclear negotiations that he tried to rejuvenate after Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal, Malley left the administration under a cloud of suspicion because he was being investigated, apparently, by the FBI for the mishandling of classified documents. And all the reporting pointed to the likelihood that those documents were Iran related, because that was what he did in the administration, but also because he was in contact with Iranian groups in Iran and elsewhere and in the diaspora, and trying to formulate these plans and whatever. And that the accusation was that he was either sharing stuff or mishandling or whatever. What he was acting inappropriately on the issue of secret American information on Iran at the same time as Iranian sort of mouthpieces, we can really say, we're getting closer and closer to being able to whisper into the ears of the other people in the administration making policy. So when we say former administration officials are saying they didn't know they were going to mine the Strait of Hormuz or something like that, you have to understand we have what has been a sort of decade-long or almost a decade-long influence operation gaining ground throughout the years with this group of people. I'm not trying to accuse them of being spies for Iran, but I'm saying they're marinating in
Right.
regime talking
I
points.
think
That
that
part
is
is undeniable.
right. That is a very important point. And Eli, your point is very important, though I have a defense for it, but we can get to that. But I brought up the Strait of Hormuz thing specifically because your accusation is serious. Your line or your counterpoint is serious. The American people don't exactly know what we're doing there. Okay? That's a big thing. Saying that the Pentagon, the Department of War of the now called the Department of War in the United States, was gobsmacked that the Strait of Hormuz would become a naval battlefield is a lie. It is just like saying, I can't believe that someone would attack the Pentagon on 9/11. Who could ever have imagined such a thing? The Strait of Hormuz has been a preoccupation of keeping the Strait of Hormuz open has been the key geopolitical economic obsession of the planet Earth for 60 years. So don't believe them. They are telling you untruths, or they are being credulous about something that an ordinary reporter with any seichel, as you would say, would know was an untruth, but they're so happy to hear a negative line about the war effort because of what I think is a not deliberate, but almost sort of like environmental effort to demoralize the country about how this war is going in its 13th day. A war, as somebody said to me, that if you were like scoring it it's the middle of the game, right? It's a football game and you're scoring it in the middle of the game. Well, right now let's say we're closing in on halftime. It's like 48-3 if you're scoring it. That America and Israel have 48 and they maybe have 3, if they even have 3. And the idea is, the second half, oh boy. Wait till they come out with the second half. Yeah.
Can I along these lines, I just want to read a tweet from Robert Pape, who is a professor at the University of Chicago, who is wrong about everything and wrote a book 25 years ago called Bombing to Win, which I believe has been discredited by events, but he still seems to think that he's a genius. This is what he wrote. Iran hit 16 vessels so far in Strait of Hormuz. That's all it takes for Iran to control 20% of the world's oil and become an oil hegemon. The number one strategic outcome U.S. has sought to prevent in the Middle East since the 1970s. Iran is not weakening, it's gaining power. To which I responded, by losing its nuclear program, missile industry, navy, and most of its top generals and supreme leader, Iran is actually winning. This is at a certain point, like, again, sechel, Dr. Pape, sechel.
How many ships do you think go through the Strait of Hormuz on a daily basis? Not right now, because there's a war on, but how many ships go through the Strait of Hormuz on a daily basis? 150 ships a day. How many is that a week? That's 1,000 ships a week. That is, therefore, 5,200 ships a year. So 16 have suffered some form of damage. They haven't been sunk. We haven't had like a ship go down to the Davy Jones locker. They're hit by a drone or something like that. It's not good. I'm not saying that's fine. But the idea, yes, that a minted professor at my alma mater would say all it takes for Iran to do is to hit 16 ships. Yes, it increases insurance. Yes, it means that shipping firms don't want to do it. And yes, it means that the United States needs to act aggressively to counter these threats, which it is doing. As Trump himself said, they are locating the drone factories and the underground drone factories. And one of the things that are being bombed now as we continue to bomb are locations as they zero in on where the drones are being kept and where they're being manufactured. And if you can really cut that off, then either the mining isn't going to, and you have minesweepers cleaning up the mines, the Strait of Hormuz will stop being threatened in a week. That's what I mean by it being 48-3. You know, if you're scoring, the 3 is the 16 ships, and the 48 points is everything else that has gone on, including everything that you cite, Eli. But like, so that
I
is,
just want to explain for fellow Jets fans out there. Most of the time, 48-3 is not considered a close game at halftime.
and now, you know, look, next year, Geno
Your
Smith,
team is up
48, it'll
48 to
be lucky to
3.
be 48-3.
As a
Yeah,
Jets fan, if your team is up 48-3, you're still biting your nails. I just want
yeah,
to say that you're
fair
using that
enough.
example
Yeah,
because if you're not a Jets fan and your team is up 48-3, you're usually feeling pretty good.
yeah, fair enough. That's a very good point. Eli, let's spend a couple minutes before we go talking about your article in which will be available later today at commentary.org. What you provide here is a historical account of a almost multi-generational, really generational, but it's even dated back further, Israeli effort to consider Iran, consider the threat from Iran, and figure out ways, modalities, capacities, and innovations to make sure that this regime that declared its purpose was to destroy Israel in the voice of its president in 2005, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, what they've done. So that's the subject, and that is what you try to tell the story of over time.
Right. And I think what it is what we're seeing is the fruits of, as you point, a generational project, which is to penetrate Iran, originally its nuclear program, but now I think we can safely say the entire regime and really a lot of its society, not just through the traditional means of recruiting, agents, which of course the Israelis have done well. And I think that they have an advantage because most Iranians hate their regime, but also the technical elements of things like hacking the traffic cameras in Tehran so that the Israelis kind of can see everything. And if you can imagine that on a wider scale, I didn't put this in the piece, but I was going back through some of my early reporting. I wrote a piece almost 20 years ago for the Daily Beast when I was there about how, I had gotten a hold of an assessment from the from the U.S. intelligence about what Israel would be able to do in a war, and this is again almost 20 years ago. And they talked about the ability of Israel to penetrate the electrical grid and control, when they could, the lights in major cities and the wireless platforms and the ability to send messages, as we already know they have, through texts and other kinds of things. This was so long ago that there was the ability to send beeper messages and stuff. But the point is that the Israelis have been working on this ability to, as I think that was your edit, to put Iran under an MRI machine now for some time. And there is there's an important that when you know that and you put that in perspective, it really does it helps explain Trump's decision making, which is that Trump did give the go ahead, and I think he was willing to give the go ahead even before he started his second term. I think there were discussions about this, but Trump gave the green light in June to Israel for Operation Rising Lion that became the 12-day war. But the first response from the administration was one of neutrality because he didn't know it was going to work. So he was getting, Netanyahu was telling him, listen, we have extraordinary intelligence and we can do things that you wouldn't believe. And I think Trump sort of thought it was a little bit of science fiction. Once Israel demonstrated that within the first hours of Operation Rising Lion, then you could argue this is the first FOMO war in American history, which is that Trump wanted to be part of it. He wanted to have the glory. And there was also obviously an important role for the United States to play because Israel doesn't have the, large, the ordnance penetrators, the bunker buster bombs that were capable of burrowing into Fordo and the facility in Isfahan, which is what Midnight Hammer was. But Midnight Hammer was almost a cost-free, risk-free operation because Israel had knocked out all of the air defenses and everything else. And as a result, I think the planning for the second phase of the Iran war this time around, I think it's true that probably Trump believed that the gunboat diplomacy would maybe yield a deal that would be acceptable. But I think he always kind of was prepared to do this. And he thought, as I think we use the phrase, it's like Israel was offering Trump to place a very large bet on a fight that they had already fixed. And that's the key, is that if you just look at it from the perspective of what the kind of combination of American and Israeli air power and then the intelligence targeting, it's a revolution in military affairs. We've never seen anything like it. Yes, there have been decapitation strikes before. They're almost never successful. We tried that in the beginning of the Gulf War against Saddam Hussein. But to do that on the scale that Israel has done, knocking out an entire level of military leadership as well, is an incredible accomplishment. And I think that more than anything is what persuaded Trump that now was the time that you could do this and really be successful. Now, we are now faced with a situation where even Netanyahu is beginning to hint that perhaps the war will end before the regime falls. I'm not sure that I think that that's a failure, as much as I want to see the regime fall and I would like to see it replaced with something better, because I also think that it's going to be so weakened. And if you look at the Israeli strategy now that I think Jonathan Shanzer spoke about yesterday on the podcast, of going after these local Basiji and IRGC headquarters that are basically just instruments of state repression against their own people, that is a chance to even the odds. And my hope, and I don't think it's that crazy, I would have said this a year ago, I would have thought it was crazy, that you could see a color revolution in Iran at some point, maybe not in the next week or two, but maybe in the next couple months, where you could see a color revolution for the first time with close air support.
Okay,
and
so this is an important
amazing
point, very important point here. And this is where I want to defend Trump, even though we have been saying now for 2 weeks he's not serious enough, and and the memes and stuff coming out of the White House are self-destructive and stupid, and it's embarrassing. This is a serious business, and they shouldn't be, going cartoonish and it's just it's cringe-inducing. But Trump has never said that this was a war for regime change. He's never said that. Bibi has never said that. Bibi has said, wait until it's safe to go out in the streets. Trump kind of said the same thing, meaning we're going to fight this war. When we're done, we don't know what the circumstances are going to be, but when we're done, take back your country. You can't do it in the middle of the conflict. We're running 5,000 bombing runs a day. Stay in your houses. Don't be crazy. But when the dust settles, we'll see what the circumstances are. And it turns out that Trump and Bibi keeping their powder dry on not saying, we will consider this war a success when the mullahs fall and something else takes their place, I think is not only rational in terms of not overpromising, because you can't bomb to win in some ultimate sense in that way, but saying we are taking out the threats that we see to the United States and to Israel. Nuclear program, conventional missile program, regime planning, Navy, counter-strike capability, and making sure that we make it clear to Iran that if it tries to threaten its neighbors ever again, we'll just fly right back and do what we have to do. If they start rebuilding air defenses, we'll take them out before they become live. We're keeping them demilitarized in some fundamental sense. What happens after is in the hands of the Iranians. Bibi has said that. Trump has said that over and over and over again. And I think maybe we have underestimated the degree to which they understand that there's no magic that is going to create a structure to replace the mullahs with something else. They don't have it. We're not going to occupy Iran and make a regency with Paul Bremer at the head of it and then start elections, and nor are the Israelis. Stuff is going to happen in Iran. It is not predictable what that stuff can be. We don't know who's going to survive after the war, what leaders, what military, what civilian leaders, who's in the parliament. who, all of that, what people are going to say, what they're going to want, but they're opening a gigantic amount of space for political change in Iran. And so that's all the best that we can hope for, really, is that there be space. Because it depends on how rooted you can't pull a tree out by its root. There are trees, you can't pull a redwood out by its roots. Now the regime is only 47 years old. It's not like a redwood, but one hopes. But it is supported by deep reservoirs of religious fundamentalism and Persian nationalism and all kinds of things that go into this. So I think,
John, I actually think the Persian nationalism plays against the religious part of it.
Fair enough. I'm sorry. Yeah. I just meant it's a complicated country. It was never colonized. It's its own thing.
Well, it's kind of colonized.
Well, not
during the Great Game in the 19th century under the Qajar dynasty. The Iranians were effectively colonized by the British in the south and the Russians in the north.
Effectively, but not. They were not India.
No, they were not India. You're correct. They were not India, but they were.
They were not India. They were not Siam. They were not in that sense.
They were the sick man of South Asia.
Right, but they have always been their own thing. It's a very complicated country.
But that complication is also what helps, in a certain way, work against the mullahs too, because Iran is not a country where you would have to implant ideas about pluralism and democracy.
So glad you mentioned this, Seth. Yes, 100%. That there is a tension in Iranian history, between recent Iranian history, which is that since the late 19th century, there has been a real organic push for something like a constitutional system.
Okay, everyone's got to. I'm going to stop here because we're running out.
We got to go. Okay,
but this is Eli's Breaking History podcast, History of Iran.
Right,
the must listen of the weekend. I mean, you got to go dig back in the archives.
We reissued it, so if you go to Breaking History, it's one of the first ones that'll come up. Yeah.
Okay, there it is. Anyway, it's a few down. Yeah. It's in your feed. Go subscribe to Breaking History and listen to it, because it will inform you remarkably well. Yeah. Don't buy the hype. Don't get demoralized. Don't let them get you down. And for American Jews, take a moment to consider that our investments in Jewish self-defense and self-protection have borne real fruit this week in a way that should make us feel. I don't think we should feel more safe, because we're not more safe, we're less safe, but that this effort to protect ourselves has shown real fortitude, and that things are, in that sense, the money has been spent wisely. So that's something, as we look at the horrors that are being visited upon our community here and across the world, and at Gracie Mansion, a place I would never have put in this list. Can't believe I have to now. But that is something to be grateful for as we go into Shabbat and this weekend. So have a great Shabbat, have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Thank you, Eli Lake, as ever, and for Abe and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.